Hello, everyone. I am Claudiumurgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire Show. And today I have a special guest, Randy Woodley. Randy was raised near Detroit, Michigan, in a section of Ypsilanti called Willow Run. Randy is first-generation college taught and maternally a first-generation non-coal miner. He earned a PhD in Intercultural Studies. Dr. Woodley addresses a variety of issues concerning American culture, faith, justice, race, and our relationship with the earth and indigenous realities. He currently serves as Distinguished Professor of Faith and Culture and Director of Intercultural Indigenous Studies at George Fox University, Portland Seminary. He and his wife, Edith, are the founders of ay-luh-HAY, Indigenous Center for Earth Justice, and ay-luh-HAY Seeds. Through ay-luh-HAY, they invite people to a new relationship with creation and model sustainable farming practices and earth justice. Randy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm interested to know how it's going to go today. It should be a learning experience for me as well.
Yes. I'd like to start by asking you, what determined you to become part of the bridge between Western indigenous teachings, beliefs, mentality, and approaches to life?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I would say both of my parents are mixed blood Cherokee Indians, white and Cherokee, and I grew up with an identity, very much Native identity, but they were pretty assimilated. And a lot of the people they hung out with were also assimilated Native people from different tribes. I grew up around the automobile industry, where everyone went from the south to the north to work back in the 50s and 60s, and they would always talk about their grandparents who spoke Native and all these things. And I kind of decided at an early age, I think about third grade, that I didn't want to be an assimilated Indian, indigenous person. I wanted to be a real Native person. And so I sort of set out from that point on saying, no, this is the world that I want to reclaim from my ancestors. And I've been very fortunate to have been married a Native woman. I have Native children. I've been recognized by a federally recognized tribe, my ancestry. And I've had the pleasure of being around a lot of very old elders, traditional people who are different maybe than some of the people claiming to be traditional today. These are people who were tolerant to a fault, people who were either born in teepees on the plains, or their parents were, of course, and some parents were the original people who were captured by the military and things like this. And so not that far removed from a pre-colonial lifestyle. And so I've been able to live in both worlds, see from both worldviews. And like you say, I hope that I'm a bridge between, because our indigenous people have really a whole lot to offer the world. In fact, I think our non-Western worldview, be it indigenous or perhaps otherwise, are what's going to save our existence on this planet. So.
I agree, and we'll go deeper into that as we move along with the interview. But you mentioned something. You mentioned your children. Have they embraced their origin? Have they embraced the way of indigenous lifestyle, or they are still yearning for the Western lifestyle?
Yeah, so just like me, they're in both. So they were raised in with our traditional ceremonies, and they all, danced at powwows and, partook in the ceremonies and things like this. And they're all young adults now. and each trying to find their own way. But as they sort of reach that mid-20s point, they start coming back to their teachings, which I'm really happy about, our indigenous teachings. Yeah. So we raise them to, hopefully know how to respond and view life from both worldviews. And that takes some sorting out for anyone.
Yes. And in fact, you want them to make the difference between living on the land, which is the perspective of a Westerner, and living with the land, which is the perspective of an indigenous person. And I think this is something you mentioned in one of your books.
Yeah, exactly. We have to learn how to live with the land. And that's what my wife and I do out here. And our children have been raised with that idea. And they all live in cities right now, but some of them are starting to think about, the future and perhaps finding a place and living with the land instead of on the land in the city. So
yes.
It's a dilemma that a lot of indigenous people face.
Yeah. And these days, more and more facts are coming to light about what the indigenous people endured over the years, and especially in North America and South America. And lately, I think you heard about the mass graves of indigenous children discovered in Canada. What do you think we have to do in order to heal such wounds and let the souls rest?
Yeah, so, and there was an investigation. We finally have a indigenous person over our Department of Interior, which I believe would be similar to Canada's Flora and Fauna. And she's just starting to investigate these boarding school atrocities and things. We are so far behind Canada just in the discovering and admitting. But our boarding schools lasted just as long and had just the same sort of consequences. And so I know for a fact that we will be discovering the same thing. A lot of children buried in places to keep the place looking like they were killing children, right? So they would just say, oh, they ran away, and never heard from them again. So we're going to discover that. We're going to discover all the sexual abuse and, of course, the torture and the cultural abuse and physical abuse and all of those kinds of things as we go down the road in this. And at some point, we will hopefully be where Canada is right now. But the problem is with Truth and Reconciliation, the TRC, I'm sort of not in favor of the way things have been done in Australia and Canada, or South Africa and Canada. I think, first of all, we need a truth commission where we just, for a number of years, hear the stories of Native people. When you say truth and reconciliation, it implies that the Native people have an expectation on them. And I don't think spirituality dictates. I think spirituality is a choice. And so if we are to come up with what I would call a bona fide sort of position and way of doing things and way to change our country, and I guess the same I would say applies to Canada, that we need to merely hear the truth with no other expectations, and then put indigenous people in these positions of power so that they can be making decisions as representatives. And then we will work out what the solution may be. But I don't think there's a formula. And I don't think reconciliation, although I'm all for reconciliation, I don't think that can be an expectation. If you're going to heal, you can't put an expectation on someone else.
Yes, and I think it's still a lot of hypocrisy involved in this process, because in Canada, the government celebrated the TRC day, but at the same time, the government went after the judges who decided that the children the families should be compensated financially. So on one side, they say, yes, let's reconcile and mourn this death. But at the same time, they are not willing to make any type of compensation, which kind of makes that desire or that approach nil and void. It's a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of hypocrisy.
Yeah, and financial reparations is one aspect, but we had to be much more creative than that. The financial reparations and the saying "I'm sorry" goes a little down the road for bringing about healing, but it certainly is just a first step. There's got to be a whole lot more creative thinking, a whole lot more ideas, a lot more ideas where Indigenous people are the people actually in charge. Instead of just being invited to the table, the people who created the governments that created and the churches who created the offenses need to be the junior partners in this process. And that's just not a European trait. Western Europeans who become Americans and Canadians don't necessarily know how to be junior partners. And it's the offended who need to be making most of the decisions, not the junior partner.
In your opinion, this type of extermination of younger generation was done in order to not have land claims later on in the future, or because the governments were afraid of the type of spiritual approach of Indigenous people?
So a couple of things, Claudiu. I think those are probably subsidiaries or spin-offs of the real root, but the real root, I think, goes much deeper. The real root is that white supremacy was a ingrained, baked in the bread, ubiquitous construct in people's lives as soon as they arrived. Mm-hmm. And when you believe that you are superior to someone else, you can begin to degrade them and do whatever you want to them for whatever means necessary. So whether it's for land and greed or fear or all of those things stem from white supremacy. The idea is that white Western European-based people deserve all money, power, and influence in a society, and everyone else doesn't deserve as much. And when you normalize that through our systems, like our economic systems and our religious systems and our social systems and our political systems, when that is normalized, then it seems normal to treat these people, whoever these people are, as less than human, and less of a human than we are. And so we have to deal with the root of things, which is white supremacy.
Yeah, and you mentioned colonialism. And again, in my opinion, it was wrong from its inception by enforcing beliefs and ways of living onto those that were not in need of such social and cultural changes. And on top of that, was implemented under the false pretense with a ferocity that we can barely comprehend. So do you think that what's going on in the world today is another nuance of colonialism, but applied to all races, or is something even more destructive and lethal?
I think it's just another expression of white supremacy. So what we call the cultural wars in America, I'm not sure if that's what you call them in Canada, but what we call the cultural wars is just a extreme reaction in the rise of white supremacist terror groups as well, to the fact of what I just stated, the normalization of whiteness. And, I'm afraid it's taken us places where we never thought it would go. We thought we were all past that, right? But we're not past that because we haven't dealt with the root.
Yeah. Let's delve into your books, and I'll quote: "Harmony is the way of nature and by design of the Creator. Creator expects us to reshape the world we know into a world intended for all creation to live well together." That's beautiful. How do you think we can reach that goal We have to look inside, in my opinion, to be able to develop ourselves. What's your take on it when you wrote that line there?
Yeah. So when, modernity has basically cut nature off, right? We have, every now and then we sort of visit nature. But mostly around us are all the things, whether it's in politics or religion or whatever, human-made things that, give us pride in being human. But when we are in creation, and my personal belief is in a creator, we see whether you believe it to be the universe or a personal creator or whatever your belief is, there's this great mystery that inhabits everything. And from that, we develop our spirituality. And from that is where our indigenous people have developed their spirituality. And we're beginning to lose it, of course, because of modernity and because of the Western worldview and all of those kinds of things. But I don't think it's too late. And so to be in nature, to be in tune with nature, to be out in creation and watching this, multiplicity of what I call the community of creation at work, and to understand how the great mysteries presence works through those things is to be spiritual.
Yes, and we have to understand that we lose our balance and our frequency when we spend too much time between cement walls. So we have to go outside and ground ourselves. And yeah, maybe might laugh at you when you hug a tree, but that's very important because that tree can absorb all your negative energies. And recently I was told when you walk on the beach, please keep your both feet and palms on the sand, because the grounding, it's even much better by doing that. So I also learn every day new ways of grounding, and when my viewers and your readers should understand how important for our life balance, health, spiritual, mental, and body health and balance is to ground as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote this book, Becoming Rooted. It's a 100-day journey in reconnecting with sacred earth, right? So my idea was if I can get people to sort of think from a more indigenous perspective for 100 days, and not just think, because that's where we run into problem with the Western worldview is dualistic, Platonic dualism that says that the ethereal is more important than the material or the physical world. While we are in this particular body and on this particular earth, it's all spiritual. Everything is spiritual. And so if I could, and so we have at the end of each reflection, short bite-sized reflection, we have an action, a spiritual action that people can take to reconnect with the earth. And the idea is if we can do that for 100 days, people will begin to change their worldviews. They will see life differently. And the Western worldview is not going to sustain our future. And so our only hope, I believe, is for people to develop a more indigenous worldview. And that's why I did this particular book this way. I also write books on theology and other things that I sort of attack head on. But this, I wanted for us just to ease to and reconnect with the great mystery in creation.
Yes, we'll touch on all the other books because most of them have very interesting and intriguing titles, and I like titles. I'm an author as well, and I like catchy titles. Becoming Rooted is your latest book, which will be released soon, and people can pre-order it. And I think it's amazing that Indigenous people like you all over the world are willing to share this knowledge with those seeking it, even if they are Westerners, even if they are from South Africa, Asia. They are willing to share it because this is the only way, as you mentioned, we can propagate the knowledge, apply it, and survive as species.
Yeah, we're in the midst right now. As bad as things seem with the quote unquote culture wars, as bad as things seem with fascism around the world, as bad as things seem with white supremacy, we are in the midst of what I would call a great awakening, spiritual awakening. And people are we've sort of like our ancestors knew this day was coming. They foresaw it, and whatever ways they were able through their wisdom to know the way of the Europeans' invasion and settler colonialism is only going to last so long, and then they're going to need us, right? And so, I don't claim to, carry a lot of wisdom. I try to reflect on my short 65 years on earth and the things I've learned from other elders, and my wife and I spend a lot of time talking about these things together, and just being out in creation and understanding like how the big picture works. But we're all spiritual. We all have the capacity to be wisdom keepers, to understand things that we can pass down. And we're at a place right now, and I'm especially excited about the millennial generation and Gen Z generations, because they don't want the same paradigms that their parents had, and their grandparents. So people like me, they want to turn over all of this and have a new way of living and a new way of existing, what I call the harmony way. And I believe you talk also about these common values and way of living in love and appreciation and without war, and where the ground is healthy and it produces everything it can. And all of this is our Native American harmony way. I'm excited that they look like they're positioning themselves to embrace this. And that's what makes me excited. I hope I live to see it. I hope I live to see the fruition of it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we were told that this should end in 3 to 4 years by the end of 2025. Either way or another, we will see how that pans out. But yes, I hope to be around.
I think so the Mayan calendar, I have a friend, Geraldine, who's expert in the Mayan calendar. She's a professor. She was a professor down in Peru. But and so I think the idea is that a lot of people think the world's going to end, but I think we have until, according to that and some of the Hopi prophecies and other things, they suggest that by about 2025, we have a way to restore the order into a more harmonious worldview. And if we don't by then, that the world will spin into extreme chaos. So I don't, I look at prophecies and I understand what they are. I mean, they are not some magic. They are people with extreme wisdom who look at the present circumstances, and based on the present circumstances, understand what possible scenarios might be. And they understand like what will happen if they play out. And so, I think I do put considerable concern into our world, and hope that by 2025 that we can get things straightened out.
And just to show that everything is interconnected and everything is energy and vibration, I will mention something from your book, Becoming Rooted, where you say that medicine plants are not nearly as potent as they used to be due to a high degree of carbon in the atmosphere. They are nutrient deficient. So I think that applies not only with the plants, applies to us. Correct?
Yes, I think you're right. I think we are weakening in some senses, but hopefully our curiosity is growing and strengthening. And I think the knowledge that we have lost can be regained. I think our greatest teacher is the earth herself, Mother Earth. And I know the plants have come to our people in our dreams, and animals come to us in our dreams. And we garner a lot of wisdom from the world around us, the earth around us. And so if we can commit to be connected with the earth, I think we can perhaps regain a lot of the lost knowledge.
Yes, I mean, flying with the eagle or the condor, or running with the cheetah and the the panther, are tangible feelings for an indigenous person, either in North America or South America or even in Australia. And maybe that was done with the help of plants. When induced that increased consciousness and different state of consciousness, they were able to fly or feel these birds and animals and understand nature much better in that state of consciousness.
Yeah, I think that the great mystery, the universe, is always reaching out to us, but very seldom do we have our receptors where we're in our hearts and our minds open to be able to receive the message that we're being given. And so again, this is the point of trying to reconnect people with the earth.
Yeah, and that depends on our lifestyle, because if we have an agitated all time on the go without pausing and thinking about what we are doing, we will never be able to read these messages, read into these vibrations. And I think I know how it is. I felt it, so I can vouch for that. I mentioned about other books. So one of them is Indigenous Theology and the Western Worldview, a decolonized approach to Christian doctrine. What have you tried to achieve through this book?
Well, that's a good question. And my book before this was called Shalom in the Community of Creation. So I tried to translate our native harmony way in a way that Christians and even Jews, but particularly Christians, could understand the Shalom construct, which is much very similar to our Native American harmony way construct. And each of our tribes have different ways of expressing our harmony way and what it is. And in among the Kituas, among our Cherokee people, we say Eloheh. Navajo say Dejon or Hajon. Every tribe basically, or most that I know of, have a different word for that, but it all means to live life in this harmonious existence, to treat others the way we want to be treated, to treat the earth the way that, in all the community of creation, the way that we would want to be treated. And so, yeah, I think to theology and religion, of course, our country, the United States, was founded under the guise, and so was Canada, the doctrine of discovery, which was a religious doctrine, and so a Christian doctrine. And so we can't divorce, and then a lot of oppression came through the church as a result. So we can't ignore the role that Christianity has played and the influence that Christianity has played in the US and Canada, and in much of the known world, the Americas. And the harm that's been done. And so as I was a whole part of that system for a long time and still teach at a seminary, and I still write and people consider me a theologian, but as I have sort of climbed the mountaintop of that experience, and now I sort of look down and tried to understand it, what I have understood is that this role of white supremacy and this role of Platonic dualism and hierarchies and intrinsic categorization and binary thinking, and all of that has been basically sold by the church, by Christianity. And I'm not saying other religions haven't done a part of that, but I'm just talking about the American experience. Okay. And so, so if, having been in that world, if I'm not trying to repair that world, I wonder how good a person I would actually be, right? And so what I try to do is speak the language, but get people to see from a different worldview and perspective. And so, like, for example, one of the things that I talk about usually is that, first of all, Jesus never became a Christian. I don't think he intended to start a religion. I think he intended to start a way that people could follow regardless of who they are. And if he ever did intend to start a religion, I don't think it would look anything like Christianity right now. And so, and then the way that we have taken Jesus and created a doctrine of him, instead of his teachings being taken seriously. And the reason we've done that is because of Platonic dualism. So this is that split between, what we think really and what we do. And so the church has gotten to a place where it doesn't actually have to do what Jesus taught. It only has to think the correct things. In other words, orthodoxy over orthopraxis. And that is not at all what Jesus taught. And so I began to understand Jesus as an indigenous person. And he was a tribal person. He was someone who wasn't a city person. He was someone who talked all about flowers and animals and trees and the sky and weather and all of these kinds of things. And so he appears to me much more indigenous. He definitely didn't have a postmodern worldview. And so if we can begin to understand a little more about who Jesus actually was and what he taught, and de-doctrinate the teachings of the church, perhaps there's a chance. I'm not sure yet. I'm still weighing that out.
Yes, I mean, if I can summarize my way of understanding Jesus and the way his purpose was for us to come into the Christ consciousness concept through the way of living and going back to the source through direct contact, no intermediaries. And our power of the essence of or spark of God is unlimited, because he said, you can do more than I can do if you follow these steps. So I think it's a very simple, is the essence of what he tried to teach us. And we lost that essence, and the church put in place all these customs and, as you said, doctrine with a different purpose that doesn't serve us as human beings in order to reach the essence of God, or our own essence, which is the spark of God.
So, yeah, I would say that the way we understand God or creator, great mystery, universe, however you like to frame, I don't think God gets that concerned about, us not understanding a particular name. But I think if you are coming to know the great mystery through the Jesus channel, let's call it, then it behooves Christians to not only act like him, but to continue in his teachings, and which is not at all how I could characterize the church's history. And so if we are to give our homage to Jesus, then people had better act like Jesus. And so in Jesus' life, the whole Jesus story from start to finish was about vulnerability. It wasn't about wielding power. It was about being vulnerable. It was about challenging the misguided authority of power. But his whole life speaks of vulnerability. And if Jesus is supposed to show us who God is, then I would think that being vulnerable then is probably God's most overwhelming trait. And to me, I think we are most spiritual when we are vulnerable. And so this vulnerability of God, the vulnerability of Jesus, is something that is the opposite of pride, hubris, and it creates humility, right? But instead, it's created this certainty in the church of doctrinaire certainty. And I think that's the opposite of what Christ taught.
Yes, and what better times to apply the teachings and behaves like Jesus than now? Because if the next years will be as harsh as people say they're going to be, I think we'll make it easier if we behave in a humble way, helping our neighbors, be thankful for the little we're going to have. and that will make this transition much easier for everyone.
Yes, and I believe that there are many people who would identify themselves as Christians who are beginning to ask for a new way of thinking, and I believe that my best hope is that they will find it and use it. So,
how is the book received by both the public and the church figures? If there were any reactions to your book?
Which book, or just any of my books?
No, the Indigenous Theology and the Western Worldview.
Okay, well, it won't be released until April of 2022. So the Becoming Rooted gets released January 4th. Indigenous Theology is April 14th, I think. And both can be pre-ordered right now, but I expect that will create a little bit of a ruffle in some people's feathers. But probably the one that will even more is the book that I have coming out after that called, and it's just not even got to print yet. It's still in editing stages. It's called Mission and the Cultural Other, a closer look. And it's a critique of Western mission, because the missionaries are sort of the darlings of Christianity. And I'm basically trying to turn the whole system over and say that because of wrong thinking, wrong doctrine, this has been one of the #1 oppressive forces in the world coming out of the church. And so I expect that one will even get me more heat than the other one, but it's okay. I think, I've been a person who's been able to stand in the middle of the fire, most of my life. So I'm used to that.
Yeah, you're quite prolific. And you know what? Again, you just mentioned that book, but what if the church will come to an indigenous group and ask them for a representative to come over and teach their point of view, give that knowledge to a larger number of upcoming priests, let's say, in the Catholic or Orthodox Church? That will show inclusion, that will show humility and willingness to understand the world from the other person's or race point of view. That will be, yeah. I don't know if you touch on that in your book, but that would be amazing.
Well, Claudiu, what you've just hit on is exactly what my wife and I do here at ay-luh-HAY Indigenous Center for Earth Justice and ay-luh-HAY Farm and Seeds. We bring, now because of COVID, we're on a hiatus from physical schools, but we do have cohorts that are meeting online. And that's what we do. We bring people here in the past, the other places where we've had our ay-luh-HAY schools, we bring them here, we teach, we bring in other Indigenous teachers because we don't in any way feel like we have all the answers. We let them hear from different Indigenous perspectives. We get them in touch with the earth. We go through ceremony, all of these kinds of things. And so we've just moved to the place that we're at about 18 months ago. We finally found a sort of a final rendition of ay-luh-HAY that we could do. We had 50 acres in Kentucky. We built that all up, had very successful schools. We lost it all to a group of violent white supremacists paramilitary group who fired a 50 caliber machine gun on our property day and night, trying to get rid of us. We lost everything, sold that at the bottom of the economic downturn, came out here. I started working as a professor in Oregon. We were able to buy a small farm and start the process. We lived there for 9 years. And then now we finally were able to buy a larger 10-acre property where we have zoning to build the kinds of buildings that we need to, very rustic buildings, so that we can have our schools again and all of that. And so we're in the midst of doing that right now. And I think once that gets going, we will be one answer, certainly not the final answer or not the only answer, but one answer to what you just said. And in the meantime, I have churches coming out and volunteering sitting down, talking, bringing their youth groups out and asking us to talk with them, all those kinds of things, so that they can begin to change. We understand it will probably be a slow change, but I think any change is progress.
Yeah, beautiful. And that will be in a very non-invasive way. It's a welcoming way and not imposing anything on anyone, because this is the normal way, or should be the normal way of living in communion with nature. And from there, spirituality arises in every single one of us. Yeah. I wish you luck with Disney property.
Yeah, my wife and I are very hospitable. We've hosted people from around the world for as long as we've been married. We'll be married 32 years next month. And both of we come from homes where our homes were just an open door for people. And so if we do anything well, I think we are hospitable well. And what I've come to understand about hospitality is that is what really opens the door to peace and shalom, to harmony, to however you would like to think of it. It's the opening our homes to others, the welcoming. And so if we can do that well, I think extending the metaphor, but the door's wide open, right? And many people will walk through.
Yes, nice. Another book of yours is The Harmony Tree, A Story of Healing and Community. And it's a touching story about the old grandmother oak tree that tries to make friends with newly planted trees that are shallow and focused only on themselves. It gave me the impression of pretty much the society we are living in. And you kind of hinting that even plants, if are being planted in an environment that it doesn't induce love and gratitude, might stay selfish and just look for themselves instead of lending a hand and energy and some sap to nearby tree. Is that a fair point of view?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it. That's my favorite book, by the way, that I've written. And I've written now a second sequel to The Harmony Tree called The Harmony Tree 2. And then I have in mind the prequel, which will be about special children with autism, what we call autism now, and how they were treated much better in society among our Native people before contact. But so it will be a Harmony Tree series eventually. But yes, the first one, The Harmony Tree, A Story of Healing and Community, is I really started out by wanting to have a metaphor that people would not reject between host people and settler colonial peoples. And this is a healing story for that to happen. It's also a number of other things. It's an environmental book about clear cutting that makes children, raises their awareness with clear cutting. And then it also is a book that animates nature, so that children can understand that these are not objects out there that are dead, but these are things that are alive. And so all of that is what I'm hoping to accomplish in the first book. And I feel real good about that. I'm really hopeful that children, as they begin to see that book and understand what that's about, will grow up and understand, oh yeah, that's what that book was about. Maybe they won't understand it all. It's written for ages 6 to 11. I always say written for ages 6 to 11 and adults, because adults start to get the message when they read it as well. So, so I think starting with children is what we have to do in order to really begin to see a change in the future. And so I love that book. I'm glad that you brought it up. I didn't expect that you would, but thank you.
And we always, as adults, find this a nugget of knowledge and wisdom in a children's book, because it's that our inner child who maybe looks for that information and for that piece of wisdom to readjust ourselves somehow at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, maybe we were not allowed to ask those questions, or we didn't know to ask those questions as children, and now we can ask them. And so, yeah, hopefully that will become a bright light in a lot of children's lives. So.
Yes. A statement highly vehiculated these days, especially by politicians, but also used by Jesus, because we talk about Jesus, is let's do this or that for the common good. But if one goes behind the words and look at the actions, sees the hypocrisy. Do you think that this is another plague that prevents us from becoming better human beings?
Right. So I think there's, in many religions, the common good is taught, right? I mean, things like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But the problem is, actually living a life that does that, right? And so, and the problem, I think, again, with many religions is because we think if we retain it in our minds, that we retain it in our lives. But actually, that's what Paulo Freire calls the pedagogy of the oppressed. To transfer knowledge is not to learn. To learn is to transfer knowledge and embody it. And so I think a lot of us have a missing step, and that is the embodiment. And I think it's been so missing for so long that we need mentors and others around to help us embody those principles and understand in our own lives, not necessarily a formula, but as people work these things out in their own lives and in their own communities and religious organizations or other spiritual organizations that are in particular communities, have an obligation to the common good in their communities. And so if they would look around their communities and understand where harmony has been broken, where the common good has been violated, and say, what would it take using a strategy of the common good to heal? And that's the missing component. We've got to embody our thoughts in order for the common good to mean anything. And that also means structurally in our politics and our social systems.
Yes, we have to go back to those elected individuals and remind them that they work for us. We put them there, and their mandate is specific, and they shouldn't overreach their mandate. And the common good involves them as well, and it's not just empty words, which should be imposed onto us and mean nothing to them. So
yeah. So, and I, it could be hypocritical, like if I was just standing here teaching that, right? But people don't probably, your viewers may not know my wife and myself, but we've been involved in our Indigenous communities and other communities for most of our adult lives. We have had feeding programs. We have had food closets. We have had houseless persons ministry service to help people get showers and wash their clothes, and we've done after school tutoring for children. We've helped young parents become better parents. We've mentored numerous people around the United States and Canada. We have done Indigenous language classes. We've created a lot of different things in our lives. I guess we've done just about everything in terms of social conditions, and we've created political movements, grassroots movements that took on cities and counties and major employers. And so we've been involved in this all of our life. I'm getting kind of old. I'm getting kind of tired, and we're starting a new farm, which like I said, we've only been here 18 months. So I'm quite busy right now. So you don't see me out on the protest lines or, but you do see me, like we're involved right now. I just signed a petition last night to recall a particular bad county commissioner. But we're at the place now where I think our job is mostly to encourage others to do that based on our experience. So I just want people to know that the things that we're asking people to do, my wife and I have spent a lifetime doing.
Yes, always lead by example. That's great. Thank you. I recently came across the Native American Church, also known as Peyotism and Peyote religion. Do you think that, they teach a combination of traditional Native American beliefs and Christianity with sacramental use of the entheogen peyote. So do you think that such approach is a bridge between Christianity and indigenous way of living?
Well, I think I don't know if the Native American Church started to be the bridge. I don't know if that was their goal. I know a little bit about the history. I've been participated in Native American Church ministry or meetings, peyote meetings. Some are more of what you talk about. Particularly, there's a branch called the Crossfire Ceremony where they actually make the fire, instead of a half moon shape, it's in the shape of a cross, and they sometimes read the Bible and those kinds of things. But I think what they're not, and I can't speak for, I'm not a Native American Church member, and I can't speak for them, but my impression is that they're trying to offer a more indigenous form of spirituality than the church was able to offer. And of course, our use of plant medicine, which is what peyote is, it's a medicine, just like ayahuasca and all the other many medicines that we have been given on this earth, when used properly and as a sacred element, it does a lot of good. So, and I know people who have been healed physically from the use of the medicines and prayer. And so, so I don't know if it's really, I wouldn't try to call it a bridge. What I would call it is an alternative, perhaps, but maybe it's the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah. Randy, thank you very much. We are approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
I would just encourage people, it's important to think deeply, but when they get out in creation, when they get out among the community of creation, I would ask them to sort of, to try and suspend for an hour their thinking caps, as some people call it, and just feel what creation has to offer. And I think that will begin to change people's lives. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And to my
Thank
viewers,
you, Claudiu.
Thank you. And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Like it, share it. Get a free copy of my first book when you visit my website. Support me on patreon.com/claudiumurgan. And until next time, love and gratitude.